The morning Marcus Reed showed up for his first day as personal driver to Celeste Van, he was 12 minutes early, wearing a shirt he had ironed himself at 5 in the morning, and carrying a thermos of coffee he would not have time to drink. He had checked the address 3 times the night before. He had mapped the route twice, once by car, once on foot, just to understand the neighborhood. He had also read everything he could find about accessibility routes near Celeste Van's building, because he had been told, briefly and without much explanation, that his new employer used a wheelchair. What he had not been told was that Celeste Van was the kind of woman who made every room feel smaller simply by entering it. She came through the front doors of her residence in a motorized chair, her posture completely upright, dressed in a charcoal blazer with a pale silk blouse underneath. Her dark hair was pulled back with the kind of precision that told you she had been awake since before sunrise. She looked at Marcus the way someone looks at a report they are not yet sure they can trust, scanning carefully, finding the details, already deciding what she thought. "You're early," she said. Not a compliment. Just an observation. "Yes, ma'am. My last driver was punctual too. He lasted 3 weeks." She moved her chair toward the vehicle. "The ramp should be extended before I reach it. Not after." Marcus had already extended it. She noticed. She said nothing. She simply moved forward and got in. That was how it began, not with warmth, not with a grand moment, but with a ramp already in position and a man who did not need to be told things twice. Celeste Van was 38 years old and the founder of a supply chain company she had built from a single rented office and a borrowed laptop into one of the most respected firms in the country. She had been paralyzed from the waist down for 6 years, the result of a road accident on a mountain highway during a business trip. She had spent 4 months in the hospital. She had been back at work in 5. People who worked for her understood certain things very quickly. She did not tolerate inefficiency. She did not respond well to pity. And she did not consider her wheelchair to be anyone else's concern. She had adapted her life with the same precision she applied to her business. Ramps were logistics. Accessibility was planning. Her body was simply a variable she had already accounted for and moved on from. What she had not accounted for was Marcus. He was 34 years old, a former mechanical engineer who had left his firm 3 years earlier when his daughter's mother walked out without a word and left him with a 2-year-old named Lily. He had tried to keep the engineering job. The hours made it impossible. He had tried a desk position closer to home. The salary made it impossible. He had settled into driving, honest work, decent money, flexible enough, and he had built his life around Lily the way other men build careers. Carefully. Without complaint. One day at a time. He did not tell Celeste any of this. She did not ask. The first 2 weeks were professional and efficient and entirely without warmth. Marcus learned her schedule with the thoroughness of someone who understood that another person's time was his primary responsibility. He knew which routes had construction delays. He knew the precise angle of the ramp that made boarding smoothest. He knew that she preferred silence in the mornings and that by mid-afternoon, when the meetings had stacked up and the phone calls had run long, she sometimes needed 5 quiet minutes in a parked car before she was ready to go back inside. He gave her those 5 minutes without comment every single time. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not look into the rearview mirror with a worried expression. He simply kept the engine running at the right temperature, kept his hands on the wheel, and waited until she said, "Let's go." Then he drove. One afternoon, she came out of a lunch meeting earlier than expected and found him in the parking garage, sitting in the driver's seat, reading. Not his phone. An actual book, thick, with small colored tabs marking certain pages. Engineering theory. "You read engineering texts," she said when she reached the car. "Old habit," he said, closing it. "You're an engineer." "I was." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he could not quite name. Then she got in. "What field?" "Mechanical." "Some structural work alongside it." She did not respond. But that evening, her assistant sent Marcus a message asking if he would be willing to sign a broader confidentiality agreement. "Standard protocol," the assistant said, "for staff who interact closely with the executive team." Marcus signed it and did not think much more about it. 3 weeks into the job, he met her bored. Not by plan. He was returning her laptop bag from the car when the elevator opened directly onto the executive floor during what turned out to be a tense emergency session. A logistics problem, a shipment delay that was creating a chain reaction through 3 client accounts simultaneously. Her operations head was presenting solutions, and Celeste was listening with the expression of someone who had already seen the flaw and was waiting for someone else to find it too. Marcus set the bag down quietly near the door and turned to leave. "Read." He stopped. Celeste was looking at him steadily. It was not quite an invitation. It felt more like a test. "You heard the problem. You have 30 seconds. Tell me if you see something they don't." Every head in the room turned toward the man standing in the doorway in his driver's uniform. Marcus stood still for a moment. Then he said, in the calmest voice he had, "The delay isn't coming from the port. It's the preclearance window. If you reroute the secondary chain through the inland hub and move the documentation process forward by 24 hours, you recover 2 days. Maybe 3. Silence filled the room. The operations head opened his mouth. Celeste raised one hand, and he closed it. "Get him a chair," she said. He did not become a consultant that afternoon. Celeste Van did not work that way. She was not impulsive. She was not swayed by a single moment. But she was, above everything else, a rational person, and what she had heard in that doorway was a clear mind reaching a clean answer in the time it took everyone else to shuffle their papers. She began asking him questions. Not in the car, not in a way that disrupted his duties, but in the 10 minutes before morning departures when she would come down early and sit in the back while he completed his pre-drive checks. She would present a problem the way someone presents a puzzle, without urgency, without pressure, just to see how the mind on the other side of it moved. He answered. Sometimes she agreed with him. Sometimes she pushed back hard, taking his reasoning apart piece by piece to show him where it would have failed. Once, she reversed his entire approach and demonstrated clearly why his version would have collapsed at the 3rd stage. He sat with that for a moment and then admitted, quietly, that she was right. She did not say she was impressed. But the next morning she came down 10 minutes earlier than usual. Lily entered the picture on a Thursday in October. The school called at 2 in the afternoon. Lily had a fever. She needed to be picked up. Marcus was in the middle of a 4-hour wait outside a government building while Celeste attended a licensing meeting inside. He took the call in the front seat, and something happened to his face, the kind of change that only happens when a child is involved. He knocked on the partition window. "Ms. Van, I apologize. I have a family situation. I can have a replacement driver here within 20 minutes. She had heard enough through the screen. "How old is the child?" 5. "Go and get her." "I'll wait." "Ma'am, that's not necessary." "I said I'll wait. Go." He was back in 22 minutes with a small girl wrapped in his jacket, warm and heavy-eyed with fever and entirely unimpressed by the large vehicle. Lily looked at the back seat. She looked at Celeste. And with the honest directness of a sick 5-year-old who had not yet learned to pretend, she said, "Are you in that chair because your legs don't work?" Marcus went completely still. Celeste looked at the child evenly. "Yes." "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." Lily thought about this with the seriousness of someone receiving important information. Then she said, "Okay," leaned against her father's arm, and closed her eyes. Celeste watched the child for a moment. Then she turned to look out the window and stayed quiet for a very long time. Something shifted after that day. Nothing was announced. Nothing was made official. But Celeste began to change in ways her staff noticed before she did herself. She started leaving the office at reasonable hours. Not because anyone asked her to, but because Marcus had a hard pickup constraint in the evenings, and she had, without fully realizing it, begun to build her schedule around it. The constraint became a kind of structure she had not known she was missing. She slept more. She ate meals that were not taken over keyboards. She stopped reading reports past midnight. Her assistant noticed that she laughed once in a staff meeting, a real laugh, surprised out of her by something unexpected. Her operations had noticed she was listening more before she concluded. A board member told a colleague that Celeste seemed somehow different, softer in approach but sharper in results. No one could quite explain it. What none of them knew was that twice a week, while parked outside Lily's school during pickup, Marcus had started sharing the questions Lily asked about the world. Why is the sky dark at night when there are so many stars? Do fish dream? Why are some people unkind when it doesn't help them? And Celeste, without quite knowing why she was doing it, had started answering, genuinely, carefully, in a way the boardroom had never required of her. Those conversations, small and unhurried, were doing something to her that years of professional success had not been able to do. They were reminding her that she was a person, not just a company. The crisis came in November. A competitor filed a formal regulatory complaint, targeted, carefully researched, timed to land during a major contract renewal period. Celeste's legal team was confident but slow. Her public relations team was nervous. Her board began to develop the quiet fractures that appear when people who trust you start looking for reasons not to. Marcus heard her on a late phone call one evening. He had stayed to take her to an emergency meeting and was waiting in the underground garage when her voice came through the level above, not loudly, but clearly enough. She was holding things together through sheer will, and he could hear, in the way she was speaking, how much it was costing her. When she came down, he did not start the car. There's an approach that doesn't involve fighting the complaint, he said. Operational, not legal. If you can demonstrate active compliance with the standard they're disputing, before the review date, the complaint has nothing to attach to. You don't argue against it. You make it irrelevant. She looked at him. The inland hub rerouting we discussed in September. If that's been implemented, it already demonstrates exactly what they're claiming you haven't done. You document it, file it as a proactive disclosure, and you turn their attack into evidence of your own initiative. Celeste was silent for so long that he thought he had misjudged the moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Get me something to write on." They sat in the underground garage for 40 minutes. She wrote on the back of a printed schedule. She called her legal team. She gave instructions with the focused energy of someone who has seen the way out and does not intend to waste a single step getting there. By midnight the framework was moving. Within the week, the complaint was neutralized, not won in a hearing, not fought in a public battle, simply made irrelevant by a company that had already done what the complaint said it hadn't. Her board called it a masterclass in strategy. She thanked them and moved on to the next item. But the following morning, she came down to the car earlier than usual and said, without any introduction, "I would like to offer you a formal position. Consulting. The driving arrangement can continue because I have learned that I think better in moving vehicles, but the consulting role is the real offer." She said it with the same tone she used to present logistics solutions. Efficient. Clear. As if the decision had been made some time ago and she was only now completing the paperwork. The hours are compatible with school schedules. Benefits are included. Legal has already drawn up the initial terms. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You've been planning this for a while." "Since the port bottleneck meeting," she said. "I wanted to see if you were consistent over time." And she allowed something to cross her face, not quite a smile, but close enough to one that it counted. "You're consistent." What followed was not a dramatic transformation. It was something steadier and more real than that. Marcus joined the operations team and became, over the following year, exactly the kind of quiet presence that strong organizations sometimes build themselves around without realizing it, the person whose clarity made other people's good ideas better, whose calm in difficult moments gave everyone else permission to think clearly. Lily visited the office often enough that the front desk kept a drawer stocked with her preferred drawing supplies, labeled with her name in small careful letters. The senior analysts all knew her. The head of legal had once spent an entire lunch break helping her draw a horse. And when she announced to 3 board members that her daddy fixed broken things, every one of them nodded as if this was a perfectly complete description of the men they had come to rely on. Celeste did not become a different person. She was still precise. She was still demanding. She still had very little patience for excuses or for people who waited to be told what was obvious. But she moved through her days with something less guarded in her expression now, something her long-serving staff recognized slowly, with a kind of quiet pleasure, as the look of a person who had decided to trust things she could not fully control. She had spent 6 years building protection around herself so effective that she had stopped noticing it was there. She had mistaken the wall for the foundation. Marcus had not torn it down. He was far too measured for anything so sudden. He had simply been, over and over and over again, the kind of honest and steady presence that made the wall seem like something she no longer needed. And one ordinary morning she had looked up and found she had stopped wearing it. On the afternoon that Van Logistics signed the largest contract in the company's history, a regional infrastructure partnership that represented more than anything Celeste had built in the previous decade combined, she sat in the back of the car afterward and did not move toward the door. Marcus did not start the engine. He had learned, over the months, when she needed to sit. After a while she said, "I almost didn't hire you." "I know. You had no formal service background. The agency flagged it as a risk." "I know that too." She looked out at the street, at the ordinary afternoon going on around them. "My assistant asked me why I took the chance. I told her I wasn't sure." A pause. That wasn't entirely honest. He waited. "You had already extended the ramp," she said. "Before I reached it. You didn't wait to be shown. You had thought about what I would need before I got there." She let that stay in the air for a moment. "I have spent 6 years in rooms full of people who wait to be told. You just thought ahead. That is not a small thing to me." Marcus looked in the rearview mirror briefly. "Lily asked me last night whether you were our friend." Celeste was still. "I told her yes," he said simply. She turned toward the window. The late afternoon light came through the glass and caught her face, and for just a moment, without the armor, without the precision, without the careful distance she had kept around herself for so long, she looked exactly like what she was, a person who had been carrying a great deal alone for a very long time, and who had only recently discovered that she did not have to anymore. She did not say anything. But she let him see it. And for Celeste Van, that was the whole answer. Some people change your life with loud gestures and grand declarations. Others simply show up on time, think one step ahead, and stay. And sometimes, quietly, that turns out to be the braver thing.